think African Americans have a deficit mentality? Do you think African Americans have a deficit mentality?
Real quick, can you define deficit mentality in the context you're using it in that question?
Well, let me give you the definition. I'm just saying more like a you want to explain that, Tara? Mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I know in the education field is more along the lines of like when teachers or administrative leaders focus on the problem rather than the potential. So you're like, oh well, for instance, like the kids, these students won't be able to do well because they're living in poverty. They're from single-led households. So you're focusing on that as opposed to seeing the potential and what they can do.
So it'd be like that victim. What you say along the line, like the victim, when people say here the
Victim
victim
Olympics.
Olympics thing,
Yeah,
kind of like that.
Olympics.
It's just a different wording.
I would say definitely, definitely, and I think it's because it makes a lot of us feel better about not accomplishing anything or quitting on things early, right? We can always tie it back to that, excuse in terms of, oh, well, I come from this type of neighborhood, or I had this kind of upbringing. And don't get me wrong, like I don't want to say excuse like that just doesn't factor in at all because it does, right? But fact of the matter is that in that same neighborhood where you got shooting going on and drug dealing going on and young pregnancy going on, you have people that are prospering, that are leaving that situation and prospering, and more times than not they in a lot of times the worst situation than you are. You know what I'm saying? You at least you got one parent. This person is sleeping from couch to couch, going to school and playing ball and doing what they got to do to get the hell up out the neighborhood. So but again, it helps me sleep better at night if I could tie my failure to something that's quote unquote systematic, and then I could just rest in that more so than looking at it from like a glass half full. Like, what are those type of situations instill in you? It instills hustle in you. It instills drive in you. It instills like, if I can make it out of this situation, and I'm a living example. If I can make it out of this situation, I can thrive anywhere, because it ain't nothing that I'm gonna face when I leave here that's gonna be scarier than what I seen growing up. You know what I'm saying? So that is a way of looking at it, and the ones who look at it like that tend to thrive when they leave. But the ones who, again, approach things from the deficit perspective, they tend to stay in that situation forever, making excuses. So definitely.
Yeah, I would definitely agree in the sense of having a deficit mindset, because if you look at being in the schools, being the smart kid is looked at or frowned upon in a negative way, right? So if I'm making good grades, then I'm being made fun of. And so because it appears to them that I'm bragging on myself or feeling a ways about myself, that I'm saying something about them, right? And oftentimes, Black people in general want to blame somebody else for where it is that they are. Well, and sometimes that is the case, that I'm here because of a particular reason or a person, but I don't have to stay here. The reason why I'm staying here is because of me, right? And so the people, like Trill said, that make it out see that I am in this situation, but I want to get out, and I'm gonna figure out a way to get out. And unfortunately, most of us don't try to get out. So that's my take on it.
I think sometimes too, when you come from those areas, you need educators that truly care about the children, because how many times do we hear some of those people that actually made it out of those poverty stricken areas, and they all seem to always have a story to tell about a teacher that they had that told them that they would never amount to anything. So I think we really have to start speaking life into our youth, into our children, especially if you know that they come from that, and not use that as a negative to describe them and their behavior, because they are a product of their environment. So you as an educator, how can we help change their mentality to where we can help them succeed? And you can't save them all, but if you're taking that step to be in that profession, it is your duty to try.
I agree. I would also say with the deficit mindset, like we definitely have it. I would also say that in order for you to be able to know what better is, you have to have some type of exposure to it. In most cases, some people do have that exposure. They do have teachers or mentors or other people that they look up to that's able to pull them from that space, from that poverty, and introduce them to new environments that will actually help them expand their mind on what is out there beyond whatever they see when they walk out their front door. But then there are those that don't have that access. They don't have the mentorships, or maybe they don't know anyone who can mentor them beyond what they already see. And so a lot of the reasons why I think we're in the deficit mindset is because we don't, in order for you don't know what you don't know. In order for you to understand something well enough, you have to have some type of exposure to it for you to be able to comprehend it on a different level. And a lot of us don't have that because we're in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you're not really thinking about, buying a passport or going out here to do this and do that, because you can think of 100 different ways you can spend that $200, $300 to help you get to the next day or the next week. So, we're in the deficit mindset. We need to get out of it, but we also have to talk about how we have to expose people to different things for them to be able to see beyond what they see.
I was going to say, I think part of the issue is we bought into the idea of what history has told us we are. And so we are what we think we are. And so we behave in kind. I just think it's a deficit mentality. And then we're around so much negativity. And I remember reading somewhere that it says for every one negative, you need to have at least 5 to 7 positives to counteract that, right? And so I think a lot of times we are focused so much on the reason why, as opposed to focusing on the solution of it, right? And kind of like what Trill was saying in terms of it excuses the work that needs to be done. When you're able to tie it to say, this is what happened. Yeah, we know historically, we're in a situation. I remember reading something that just kind of ran through why, right? But okay, so we know the why, and we spend so much time, money, and effort in talking about the why, but we don't put that same amount of time and energy in actually implementing the solutions. And so I think it keeps us pigeonholed into this mindset of not being able to do better. And then those that do better, we're like, oh, that's an anomaly. That doesn't work for everybody, right? And then what Tam was saying in terms of educators, as well. I've seen some great teachers that inspire and have reached some of the worst kids and have turned their lives around because they finally had somebody that poured into them. But I've also seen the opposite. And even for me, I remember my 3rd grade teacher, told me that I wasn't going to be able to get into this gifted and talented school that my parents, made me and my sisters go to. She was just like, oh, you're not smart enough. You're not going to be able to get in, So things and the fact that stuck with me since 3rd grade, so definitely, I think educators play a role, but parents have far more influence. So if your parents are thinking with a deficit mindset, then more than likely you're going to be impacted by that as well.
Definitely agree with what you guys are saying. Many times as a people, we as Black people definitely have a deficit mentality. I was looking at an article, and according to the article, factors include educational inequalities, neighborhood effects, workplace discrimination, parenting, access to credit, rates of incarceration, and so much more. One example is, as a people, sometimes we try to compensate for our shortcomings. For example, purchasing name brand things. We have to have a Louis Vuitton or any other fancy name brand, but you don't have $100 to put in this $1,000 purse. That's a deficit mentality. We want to buy this fancy car, maybe I'll say a Tesla. That's not really what comes to mind first, but maybe you want this other name brand car, but you don't have a house to live in. A car depreciates the moment you drive it off the lot. However, a house is an investment. We have a deficit mentality. How many of us have a 401k or stocks or bonds or any other type of appreciation, as opposed to getting so many things that depreciate. So absolutely, we as a people have to do better. We do have a deficit mentality.
I'll tell you what, another thing too, going back to what Mistaken was speaking on in terms of how we view ourselves and how we program to view ourselves. We program to view ourselves as second-class citizens because of, again, using a lot of the history books and shit, and you don't realize this until you get older or painted in a way that just makes us, look less than what we are as a people. So what that does is we graduate or we go to school, and let's say we do make it out. Let's say we do go out there and get that, top flight executive position at the corporate job. Now we walking around with imposter syndrome. It's like, can I really do this job? Like, I was smart in my neighborhood, but am I going to be smart in this college with all these white folks? Like there's black smart and then there's white smart in our eyes. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that right there all comes from programming. And a lot of times it'll prohibit us from making moves that we should have been made in aggressive fashion because we questioning everything. Just because I'm prospering in this environment doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to prosper in this. Like, even if you look at the colleges, they program you to think, okay, yeah, if you get a degree from Harvard, it's going to mean more than you getting a degree from Howard or, historically black college, whatever the case may be. And we could bring that down to even smaller scale. Y'all, I know a couple of y'all live in Texas, PV, compared to U of H. If we was literally trained like, yeah, you don't want to go get a degree from Prairie View. You don't want to go get a degree from Texas Southern. That shit ain't gonna mean nothing when you get in this corporate world. You want to go get you one from a PWI, so that way when you go in the interview, they gonna look at you with more respect, right? So that's the type of programming that we get. So now when we go out in the world, we literally looking down on each other in these institutions. Like, oh, you went there? Oh. So you feeling the sense of like chest sticking out based on programming. So, again, how we view ourselves is important. A lot of us don't know, that we were once kings, that we were once leaders, that even today, as far as influence, we the most influential culture in existence. Clearly, rap is the number one music genre in the world, and it's 30 years old. So despite the head start that everybody else got, we that skilled enough and we persevered that much to still be able to be just a dominant fact out here. But we just got to learn how to channel that into ways that are going to push us forward as a culture. And once we do, it's going to be over with. But I think, the main hurdle with that is what Mistaken said, like how we view ourselves. And that got to change.
And Trill, I mean, you're so right, but it goes back to the very foundation of parenting. As parenting, what are we pouring into our kids? From 2 years old and 3 years old, we have to teach our kids to be kings and queens that they are. If you instill that in the household, when kids get out, they don't have the mentality that they are inferior. They don't have it. We've all seen those kids who walk out the house and they think they are the best thing since sliced bread. And I probably dated myself because that's probably so old of a saying. But when you pour into kids and you make them feel like they are it and they're the stuff, they walk out the house and they don't know anything else. They feel that they are confident. They have the skill set. They have the competency. All of those factors. We as a people have to do better. If we do better and we raise our kids to do better, it will become generational. We have to instill those skill sets and the characteristics and the qualities and core values. And if we don't do it, who else will? We used to have a system where it takes a village to raise a family. Nowadays, Black people don't want anybody speaking to your children. Let the neighbor say something to your child and it's a problem, right? We have to hold each other accountable. Where's the accountability?
And you know what, I think to speak on what you just said too, we have to be accountable for the situations that we find ourselves in. Yes, it's because I feel like we maybe sometimes use poverty as an excuse, but what's the solution to that? Like, because you were born in poverty, are you going to stay there? So you can still give your children that mindset of you are a king, you are a queen, like your environment doesn't define who you are. So just because, you might live below the poverty line and somebody else is considered middle class, that message can still be the same to those children, to where that they can make it up out of that.
You know what the thing is about it too, Tam, is that we can not only give them the lip service, we got to be walking examples of what that success looked like. Because one thing about like growing up in our neighborhood, Like you could have like a older man telling you what to do, and hey, yeah, you telling you the right things to do. Pardon me, yeah, bro, you need to do this. You need to stay in school, man. You need to da da da. Da. But if if we don't deem him as successful, it's going in one end out the other. And that's the same thing with your parents. If we're gonna keep it real, and going back to what Tam was saying, it starts in the household. It do, but a lot of our parents are not walking examples of who we want to be. So we're not gonna take that advice the same way we would when we hear from that drug dealer that's in our neighborhood that's driving that Benz or that's living in that high price condo, or or if we got like let's say a super successful uncle in the family, auntie in the family, you're gonna take that advice a little different compared to and again, it's just like anything else. People say it all the time, like I'm not gonna take money tips from somebody that ain't got no money,
Yeah.
but regardless of who it is, you know what I'm saying. So we as parents, and that's why I'm so glad that our generation is as educated as we are, and climbing up way further than past generations was. No disrespect to them, because again, you can't teach what you ain't got, and circumstances do play a role in terms of where you are. But I think the most important thing that we can do as a parent is be a walking example of what we want our kids to turn into from a success perspective, because then we're going to be able to talk to them. We're going to have a direct line to them instead of going in one end out the other, and then them going out in the streets and listening to advice from a motherfucker that they deem as successful, they think is successful, but who really not, and who gonna fall off or be in jail in 5 years, and he done led you down the wrong path. So yeah.
And we got to stop saying too that just because our parents they didn't teach them certain things, that is now their excuse for why they couldn't teach us certain things. At some point, somebody got to break the cycle. So just because there were plenty of things that my parents didn't teach me, but guess what? I started surrounding myself with certain individuals that I looked up to. I started being mindful of the things that the things that I listened to, the things that I watched. And I figured out that just because it wasn't taught to me at home, at some point, something clicked in for me, and I had to figure that out on my own. Example, credit. The majority of us, our parents didn't teach us about credit. And the excuse is always, well, my parents didn't teach me about it. But at what point did you realize how valuable and how important good credit is? So you knew when you applied for something and you got turned down because your credit wasn't good. That should have been the first mindset of, you know what? Let me fix this. This is a problem because I really can't do much if I don't have good credit. But instead, you continue to let the cycle continue of not educating yourself about credit. And then now you haven't passed down anything to your children. So now they have made the mistake of not knowing about credit. And then they have gotten themselves into debt. So at some point, it's like the cycle has to stop. It has to end. And somebody has to figure out, like, I'm going to do better. I'm going to do better so I can teach my kids moving forward. So we can't always use the excuse, because I know for parents around our age, that's typically the excuse. Well, my parents didn't teach me that. Well, there's other parents out there who parents didn't teach them, but they figured it out and they learned and they taught something to their children. So we got to stop using that as an excuse.